it gets a little more complicated because, for example, people do walk further to better services. So, you know, Los Angeles has discovered very dramatically the fact that you can, if you introduce a pattern of lines that stop only, you know, once a kilometer or so, not every, you know, 7/10 of a mile or more, people actually, those run so much faster that people walk further to them. So it is dependent on the quality of the service, but the general rules work on it. Certainly.
First of all, just responding to that, I'd point out that if you look at Seattle's historic streetcar lines, they really were on kind of a half-mile grid system that required transfers, and people were okay because it was frequent. But I wanted to ask about exclusive bus lanes and streetcar lanes. You've posted on what Paris and some other European cities have been doing, really, you know, on every major street having exclusive lanes. And you know, in Seattle we have one streetcar line and another one coming in that don't have any, well, very few exclusive segments, and buses have also been challenging. So, I mean, what are the ways, besides what you just said about the network?
Right.
What are some ways of overcoming people's fear of taking up a lane for?
I think that the case for a bus lane doesn't have to rest entirely on the network principle, because you can also do an argument based on just person throughput. The Paris bus lanes that work very well on the boulevards are moving as many people per hour as the traffic lanes are, and usually more. Ultimately, though, all I think we can do is spread around those pictures of, you know, what a Paris boulevard looks like. It's interesting how many people, all this happened in Paris very recently. It all happened in the last decade, the bus lanes. So a lot of people are in your community are probably running on memories of their high school or college trip to Paris, when the great thing about Paris was the metro. You know, obviously you don't have the metro. But it is the continuous questioning of things, the continuous revision is really striking. And again, it's one of the things you have in Paris, and I don't claim this is the only thing you need, it certainly isn't. One of the things you have in Paris is an extremely aggressive mayor, you know, operating on the level of Ken Livingstone or on the level of Antonio Villaraigosa in Los Angeles, who is really obsessed with public transit and understands that that's the key to continuing to enrich the city. So I think I think it's very different from one city to another, but I think that what you can always be doing is throwing those photographs around, saying, you know, look at what these other cities are doing, and why exactly are we not doing that? What exactly are we afraid of? I'm afraid it's not. There's nothing easier than that.
Well, one of the challenges seems to be that I forget if you've written on this before, but the drivers see exclusive lanes empty most of the time, and think, oh well, we should be able to use that. It's empty most of the time, but it's empty because buses are zooming through.
If you were sitting still in a car, the bus lane next to you, if it's working properly, will look empty 99% of the time, and then there'll be a blur, and then another 98% of the time it will look empty. A bus lane that is full of buses is a bus lane that is obstructed or failing in some way. And you know, we can show you plenty of pictures of those. But that's really the challenge. Yeah. I mean, I think you had a question.
So,
sorry.
I noticed a great deal of discussion about technology maybe not even as important as the usefulness of service. I haven't seen much in your presentation about the long-term environmental effects of technology, specifically the greenhouse gas effect. Can you address that?
Yes. There are obviously significant emissions differences between different kinds of technologies, and obviously motor-based technologies are going to have more emissions, although emissions have come down pretty dramatically when you look at European standards, at the standards that European buses are built to now. And those are the standards that Australia tends to pick up, and they're generally stronger than the North American standards. Ultimately, if you want a zero-emissions vehicle, we need to, you know, apart from, you know, longing for the battery-powered electric bus, our options are basically some form of electric power delivered continuously, and that generally means light rail or heavy rail with a third rail or a trolley bus. And when we're talking about rail versus bus comparisons, and we're talking about an electric rail versus a diesel bus, well, that's not quite fair. We should compare electric rail to a trolley bus, really. And understand that, you know, that has some technology costs and some impact. But that's the other, that's the other form of emissions-free vehicle. And it's interesting about trolley buses because unless you live in San Francisco or Seattle and have seen a trolley bus accelerate from a stop on an uphill grade, you just don't. You're never going to get how useful these things are for hilly cities. They really are pretty amazing. Sir.
Let's go back to the exclusive transit lanes and particularly bus lanes. And sort of throw a wrinkle into that, which is, here in Seattle we have very narrow right-of-ways typically. And so when you talk about creating exclusive transit lanes, you're talking about trade-offs often with the pedestrian environment, stripping off parking and sort of running rest on the side. And so perhaps you could speak to sort of, how you balance the trade-off, because oftentimes, there's not a lot of investment that comes with just peeling off parking. We're not talking about Paris boulevards. We're talking about streets that are now sort of quite open, have a lot of asphalt. I mean, there's definitely a trade-off there. And have you experienced that in other cities or ground rules that you find helpful?
Let's talk about some typical streets. Let's talk about something like Rainier or something like 15th Northwest. We have a fair bit of right-of-way work, and but you've also got a lot of pressures for through traffic as well as a lot of pressures for continuous local serving parking. What Paris would do in that situation, in the context admittedly of higher development density, is look at how to create room for all of those things, but in the context of a larger goal about to what extent through car traffic is supposed to be a primary use in a particular street. And they would use that argument to move some right-of-way out of the through car function into a more local serving function. So an interesting example of that, if you think about the Champs-Élysées, for example, the Champs-Élysées has I think it's 6 lanes of traffic, and then it has 2 frontage lanes where you come off into them, and there's a row of landscaping between them and the main street, and then parking space, they have on-street parking, and then you have the building space. So you have a local serving street and a through serving street. They have now moved more of the through serving street over to buses and created lanes at the expense of traffic which are for buses. That's in the context of a citywide decision that you may not be ready to make, but a citywide decision that the mayor is very much behind that says, we're not about making driving easy here. Because making driving easy, we've tried making driving easy. Paris tried making driving easy. They really went all the way in the 1970s. And what they got was a freeway down one bank of the Seine, which everybody hated. And much like, and it ended up being much like some other waterfront freeways you may know about. It just, the political system just got so enraged about that first of all, of course, it was perceived as NIMBYism. We're trying to provide the car capacity that Paris needs to move all these people, and you're getting in our way, and you're not letting us build freeways where we need them. What do you want? Well, you needed a mayor who was, you needed some leadership that was ready to come back around and saying, okay, this is what we want. We're not about moving cars through the city, or at least we're not about moving cars through certain parts of the city. We're not about moving cars through downtown or through, this core segment, like from the Ship Canal down to Beacon Hill. I mean, where are you ready to say that? There probably are some places where you're ready to say that. But that's ultimately what Paris did. The capacity that they were taking was the capacity that you would use if you were trying to drive all the way across the Seine. They didn't take the capacity that you would use if you were just making a delivery. That's still there. But the streets are intentionally slow. And if you want to just get in your car and drive all the way across Paris, you can do it at about 15 miles an hour. Because you'll get stuck behind delivery trucks, because that's the whole point. The purpose of the car infrastructure is really deliveries, local serving movements, taxis, and so on. The other clever thing that Paris did, and I think this is important, is that the bus lanes, this may sound controversial, the bus lanes are actually for buses and taxis and two-wheelers, bicycles and motorcycles.